My name is Marlo, though most people call me Marley. And I can still remember the exact sound of that garbage bag landing on the floor the evening my mother threw me out. She was standing in the doorway of our Las Vegas apartment, tossing my belongings at my feet, and she said, "You turned 18. No income, no employment, and that is your problem, so leave." I genuinely believed she was bluffing like all those previous occasions, when she threatened to dump my possessions on the sidewalk if I did not start behaving more responsibly. But instead, she shoved my backpack into my arms, pulled open the front door, and pushed me into the corridor, then locked it behind her without a single glance back. In mere seconds, I went from having my own room to standing outside, holding a garbage bag, a phone with barely any battery, and $20 in my pocket. My mother had actually thrown me out at 18 without any money or employment. I stood there staring at that door and pictured myself banging on it, pleading with her to reconsider, swearing I would get a job and keep out of her way. Then I imagined the smug little grin she would wear if I did that, as if she had finally proven I was pathetic, and my dignity burned stronger than my terror. So I grabbed the bag and headed down the stairwell, choosing to leave before I started sobbing in the hallway where everyone could hear me. That evening, I sat at a transit stop several blocks away, clutching my backpack while vehicles sped past as though I did not exist. My phone screen glowed in my palm with her contact just one tap away. Reaching out to her could have returned everything to the same miserable pattern. Me saying sorry, and her acting like this was some form of tough parenting instead of pure cruelty. I powered off the phone instead and murmured to myself, "If you want me to make it on my own, fine, I will." 3 years later, that very same phone would not stop vibrating with messages from her, all beginning with, "I am sorry." If you want to understand how I went from that transit stop to watching my mother plead for me to respond, stay with me until the end. That first night, I barely slept at that transit stop. Every time a vehicle slowed down nearby, my heart leaped into my throat. By the time the sun came up, my back was sore from the rigid plastic seat, and my throat felt raw from holding back tears I would not allow myself to release. I walked to a convenience store that stayed open around the clock and rinsed my face in the cramped bathroom sink, trying not to appear like a girl who had just been cast out by her own mother. I used 5 of my $20 on a cheap breakfast sandwich and the smallest cup of coffee available, staring at the receipt like it had personally offended me. 1/4 of my funds was already gone, and I had absolutely no strategy. For the first several hours, I simply walked, hauling my garbage bag from shopping center to shopping center, pushing open doors to cafes and asking, "Do you have any openings?" The responses were almost always identical. "Not at the moment. Submit your application online. Return when things are less hectic." I had never felt more invisible in my own city. By late afternoon, the Nevada heat enveloped me like a suffocating blanket, and I found myself wandering into a church basement with a sign announcing, "Complimentary meals on Tuesdays and Thursdays." I went because I was starving, but I stayed because a woman holding a clipboard with exhausted yet compassionate eyes sat down across from me and asked my name. She introduced herself as Corinne, a social worker who assisted teenagers who were technically adults according to the law, but still completely alone in reality. When she inquired where I was sleeping, I pretended to check something on my phone so I would not have to meet her gaze, then finally confessed, "I do not really have anywhere right now." She did not gasp or give me a pitying look, just nodded as if she had heard that response countless times before. By the end of our conversation, she had me completing paperwork for a youth shelter that provided temporary beds and a shared space in a rundown but secure house across the city. It was not glamorous by any means, but it was a door that locked behind me and a mattress that was actually designed for sleeping, not waiting for buses. Over the following week, Corinne helped me more than my mother had in years. She guided me through applying for financial assistance at a nearby community college and showed me a flyer for their digital marketing program. "You are already glued to your phone constantly," she joked. "You might as well earn money for understanding how to use it." It sounded like an actual future instead of mere survival. So, I agreed. Even though I was petrified of failing, at the same time, I attacked the job search even harder. After several more rejections, a small independent coffee shop in Las Vegas finally hired me for early morning shifts. The wages were minimum, and my feet ached constantly. But every paycheck felt like evidence that my mother had been wrong about me. I added a second hustle, delivering food in the evenings, cycling cheap plastic containers of takeout to apartment buildings and office complexes for people who would never realize their delivery person was sleeping in a shared room and counting every single dollar. To make my money last longer, I started treating grocery shopping like a game. How many meals can I create from $10 if I only purchase store brands and clearance items? I threw together unusual combinations. Canned beans mixed with boxed pasta, frozen vegetables combined with instant rice, and discovered that some of them actually tasted decent. One evening, on a challenge to myself, I propped my cracked phone against an empty cereal box, pressed record, and filmed a shaky video explaining how I prepared 3 dinners from the discount section. I uploaded it to TikTok under the name Crisis Kitchen, half as a joke and half as a journal of how I was keeping myself alive. Initially, it received maybe 20 views. A couple of comments from strangers saying things like, "Appreciate this. I needed it. I am struggling too." But that small spark of connection warmed a part of me I assumed had died. While my mother acted like I did not exist, complete strangers were telling me my ideas were helping them. I still did not contact her. I did not text, did not check in even when the loneliness felt like a physical burden pressing against my chest at night. She was the one who declared, "If you want to make it on your own, do it." So, I did. I worked. I studied. I cooked from practically nothing. And without recognizing it, I was gradually constructing the first foundations of the life that would eventually intersect with hers in a manner she never anticipated. It took several months before I gathered enough courage to type my mother's name into a search bar. Until then, Vivian was merely a specter in my mind. A voice that uttered things like, "You are worthless. You will never succeed without me." Every time my alarm sounded at 4:30 in the morning for my coffee shift. One quiet afternoon at the shelter, I was scrolling through my old Facebook account, the one I had not touched since high school, when a tagged photograph appeared from a girl I barely recognized. I almost scrolled right past it until I noticed the profile picture in the corner. My mother, Vivian Prescott, beaming as though she had never slammed a door in her entire life. In the photograph, she stood beside a man wearing a crisp button-down shirt and a teenage girl in a glittery dress. All 3 of them posed in front of a gleaming SUV outside a large stucco residence in an upscale Las Vegas suburb. The caption read, "Dinner with the Whitmore family. Adore this little family." My stomach knotted. I clicked on the man's profile, saw the name Sterling Whitmore, proprietor of Whitmore Elite Detailing, a chain of high-end automotive shops throughout the valley. His timeline was filled with images of custom vehicles, charity functions, and one recent post of him and my mother at a gala, her wearing a dress I knew she could never afford on a hotel assistant manager's salary. The teenage girl was tagged as well. Her name was Tessa Whitmore, 17 years old. All dramatic eyeliner and designer footwear, posting haul videos from luxury shopping centers like it was nothing significant. What struck me most forcefully was my mother's comment under one of Tessa's photographs. She had written, "So incredibly proud of my girl. She transformed my life after an extremely difficult chapter." There was absolutely no indication that I had ever existed. No old photographs, no reference to a daughter who had supposedly chosen to run off and explore the world. It was as though she had erased me and substituted me with an improved version. Curiosity began buzzing louder than the hurt, so I dug deeper. On one of Vivian's posts, a former neighbor commented, "How is Marlo doing? I have not seen her in ages." My mother replied, "Oh, she left home to travel and discover herself. She does not really stay in contact." I sat there in the shelter common area, phone in my grasp, staring at those words repeatedly. In her narrative, she did not throw me out with a garbage bag. I simply drifted away like some wandering spirit who chose not to call. That fabrication stung almost more than that night itself. It meant she wanted everyone to believe she was a wonderful mother who had done everything correctly, and I was the irresponsible one. The longer I gazed at the screen, the more something bitter and sharp began rising in my chest. I recalled all the weekends during high school when I skipped spending time with friends to work extra shifts at the supermarket and the diner, tucking cash into an envelope at the back of my closet labeled college. That envelope had been my safety net, the single thing that made the future seem less frightening. The evening my mother expelled me, there had been no opportunity to retrieve it. I had never permitted myself to dwell on it, because the answer was obvious, and it made me nauseous. Now, with my heart already shattered open, I examined my old bank account instead, the one I had used to deposit paychecks when the envelope felt too stuffed to keep in the apartment. The account had been inactive since I departed. I pulled up the transaction history and scrolled back to the week of my 18th birthday. There it was in cold digital figures, a withdrawal that drained nearly everything I had saved, conducted in person at a branch near our old apartment. The exact same day my mother told me, "You are 18 now. I am finished." I remembered her insisting she needed my debit card to verify something a few days earlier, dismissing my concerns with, "Do you not trust your own mother?" I had trusted her enough to surrender it. She used my savings to step into this polished new existence with the Whitmores, then told everyone I had wandered off voluntarily. I felt my hands trembling while I scrolled through photograph after photograph of dinners, vacations, new clothing. My instant noodles and clearance vegetables suddenly tasted different in my memory, as though they were seasoned with someone else's stolen funds. For a moment, I wanted to hurl my phone and never think about any of it again, pretend I did not know. But another part of me, the part that had figured out how to transform $10 into 3 days of meals, understood that new information was power. Witnessing how far she was willing to go to erase me did not simply hurt. It clarified something. My mother had not merely made an error in frustration. She had made a deliberate choice. She chose a nicer residence, a wealthier man, and a picture-perfect stepdaughter over acknowledging the truth about what she had done to her own child. I locked my screen, pressed the phone against my chest, and understood this was not merely a sad tale about being thrown out. It was the beginning of something else, something that would eventually cause her flawless little world to collapse without me ever touching a single brick. Discovering what my mother had done did not make me feel powerful initially. It made me feel hollow. For several weeks after I saw those photographs and that bank withdrawal, everything in my life went out of focus. I still woke up at 4:30 for my coffee shift, but I moved like an automaton, steaming milk, and calling out names while my mind replayed that comment, "So proud of my girl," over and over again. My customers would wish me a pleasant day, and I would smile automatically. But by the time my shift concluded, my face ached from pretending. I stopped recording little cooking videos for Crisis Kitchen, telling myself it was just for a few days until I felt better. Those few days stretched into nearly a month. The application sat on my phone like a reminder of a version of myself who actually believed people wanted to hear what she had to say. The youth residence where I stayed had a curfew, and every evening I would lie on my thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, scrolling through Tessa's perfectly filtered existence until my head throbbed. Part of me despised her, but another part just felt insignificant, as though I had lost a competition I never knew we were having. One morning, I arrived late to the coffee shop, eyes swollen from crying until 3 a.m, and my manager pulled me aside. "This is the 3rd occasion this month you have been tardy, Marley," he said, not unkindly but firmly. "I appreciate you, but I cannot retain you if this persists." Something about hearing those words aloud jolted me back to the transit stop, to the sensation of being one mistake away from having nowhere to rest. I mumbled an apology and promised to pull myself together, then barely survived the shift without breaking down. That afternoon, instead of returning directly to the youth residence, I went to see Corinne. She was in her cramped office at the shelter, surrounded by stacks of files and a crooked motivational poster. She took one look at my face and said, "Close the door. Sit down. Tell me what happened." I told her everything in one lengthy, ugly rush. The photographs, the comments, the bank withdrawal, the way my mother had rewritten the narrative to portray me as the villain who ran away. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse, and my eyes felt raw. Corinne handed me a tissue, but did not offer the usual platitudes people say like, "She probably did her best." Or perhaps she did not understand what she was doing. Instead, she said quietly, Sometimes the most dangerous thing for us is the story people tell about us when we are not in the room. You cannot control that, but you can control the story you tell about yourself. Several days later, my friend Declan from class noticed that I had stopped posting on Crisis Kitchen. We were studying together in the library when he glanced at my phone screen and asked, "Hey, why did you abandon those cooking videos? They were actually impressive." I shrugged and said, "It is pointless. Nobody cares about some broke girl making meals out of canned beans." Declan laughed dismissively. "I care. Apparently the 20,000 people who viewed your last video care too. You realize most people would do anything for that kind of engagement, right?" I had not even noticed one of my older videos had quietly gained traction while I was busy spiraling. We pulled up my account, and there it was. A simple clip of me preparing 3 different dinners from $5 worth of groceries sitting at almost 50,000 views. There were comments from people saying things like, "I am a single mother, and this helped." Or, "I am working 2 jobs, and this made me feel less alone." For the first time in weeks, I experienced something other than rage or exhaustion. I felt seen. Corinne's words about choosing my own narrative and Declan's blunt honesty started to merge together in my mind. My mother had stolen my savings, rewritten my departure as me fleeing, and replaced me with a prettier story. But she could not dictate what I did with the life that came afterward. One evening, instead of doom-scrolling my mother's new existence, I positioned my phone on a shelf in the youth residence kitchen and pressed record again. My hands shook slightly as I chopped onions on the scratched countertop, speaking directly into the camera about how to prepare a full week of lunches from a single rotisserie chicken and a bag of rice. I did not mention Vivian or Tessa, but every word was fueled by the knowledge that I had survived what they did to me. I uploaded the video before I could talk myself out of it. Within a few hours, the notifications started trickling in. Not a viral explosion, just a steady stream of likes, saves, and comments from people who sounded as weary and broke as I had the evening I first slept at that transit stop. Reading them, I realized something crucial. My mother's opinion of me had almost destroyed me because I had allowed it to be the only voice that mattered. But now there were other voices, from strangers who only knew me as the girl who could turn scraps into dinner. That girl felt worth fighting for. I decided that if I was going to drag myself out of bed at 4:30, it would not merely be for a paycheck and a manager's approval. It would be for the future version of myself who would never have to ask anyone, especially my mother, for permission to exist. I did not realize it yet, but the more I poured myself into that tiny account, the closer I was getting to the moment when my story and hers would collide in front of everyone. By the time 3 years had slowly passed, the girl who had slept at a transit stop with $20 in her pocket was almost unrecognizable, at least on paper. I was 21, one semester away from completing my associate's degree in digital marketing, and Crisis Kitchen had grown from a shaky joke account into a legitimate brand. It did not happen overnight. It was thousands of tiny decisions stacked on top of each other, like the cheap ingredients I kept transforming into meals. I filmed before dawn in the youth residence kitchen, after closing shifts at the coffee shop and borrowed apartments while friends were at work. I experimented with lighting made from desk lamps and aluminum foil, filmed with my phone balanced on towers of cereal boxes and cookbooks. I learned how to edit on free applications, cut dead air, add captions so people could watch on mute during night shifts. Somewhere between all the exhaustion, one of my series caught fire. I called it Crisis Kitchen, $5, 3 meals, where I would walk through the aisles of a discount grocery store and show exactly what I was purchasing, then cook it all on camera. People loved seeing the receipt, the total, the feeling that it was actually achievable. The video that really exploded was me making a week's worth of lunches from 1 rotisserie chicken, a bag of rice, and a couple of frozen vegetable bags. I woke up one morning to my notifications frozen, my follower count jumping, and brands I had only seen in other people's sponsorships suddenly reaching out with offers. Initially, it was just complimentary products and small gift cards. Then a local discount grocery chain contacted me offering to sponsor a series if I used their sale items, and mentioned their application. I almost wept in the back room of the coffee shop when I read that email. Partly from excitement, partly from the sting that my mother was not there to witness what I had accomplished. But then I reminded myself, she had chosen not to be there. With sponsorship money trickling in and my delivery side hustle, I finally saved enough to move out of the youth residence and into a tiny studio apartment in a not great but not terrifying part of Las Vegas. It was just me, a wobbly secondhand table, a mattress on the floor, and a kitchen with cabinets that would not close properly. But it was mine. No one could snatch the key from my hand and order me to leave. As Crisis Kitchen expanded, I started receiving messages from people all over the country, single parents, college students, older individuals on fixed incomes, all thanking me for helping them stretch $20 an extra few days. I organized a fundraiser with my followers to purchase grocery store gift cards for teenagers at the same shelter that had taken me in. For the first time in my existence, I felt like what I knew had worth. And yet, whenever I had a quiet evening alone after filming, my thumb would drift to the search bar and type in my mother's name. Vivienne was still living her carefully curated existence with Sterling Whitmore. Their photographs looked like advertisements for a life insurance commercial. Matching outfits at charity galas, vacations to Sedona, smiling selfies at car shows where Sterling unveiled some new gleaming project. Tessa was always in the background somewhere, holding a designer bag, flashing perfect nails, acting as though she had built the empire herself. It stung less now, but the dull ache never completely disappeared. The first crack I noticed in their picture-perfect existence came in the form of a comment under one of Tessa's posts. She had uploaded a video displaying a pile of new clothing and electronics, tagging a bunch of brands. Buried under the "You are goals," and "I wish I had your life" comments, someone had written, "Funny you still have not paid me back for that tablet you bought with my card." Initially I assumed it was just a troll, but then I noticed more comments appearing on different posts. People mentioning chargebacks, orders that never arrived, credit card disputes connected to a Tessa W. Simultaneously, local Las Vegas community groups started sharing stories about a teenage girl who would purchase things under other people's names, then deny it when the bank called. No one stated her full name publicly, but the details matched too closely to be coincidental. I did not reach out to any of them. I did not encourage anyone to attack her. I just started paying attention. I screenshotted comments before they got deleted, saved links to posts where people talked about being scammed, copied down dates and small details. Not because I wanted to play internet detective, but because for the first time I could see the pattern clearly. While I'd been learning how to stretch every dollar, they had been learning how to exploit every loophole. Every time I scrolled through Vivienne's profile, it struck me how desperately she tried to sell the story that she was a savior mother who had rescued a lost teenager and built a perfect family. There was still no trace of me anywhere. No photographs of the daughter she had literally shoved out her front door. I felt anger, certainly, but there was something else, too. A strange kind of distance. 3 years earlier, that erasure would have shattered me. Now, with my own tiny empire built on rice, beans, and honesty, it just made her look small. One afternoon, after filming a sponsored video about making crisis meals with pantry staples, I sat down at my crooked table, opened my laptop, and stared at the Crisis Kitchen homepage. My audience knew the tips and tricks, the recipes and hacks. What they did not know was why I had started in the first place. They saw the girl who joked about being broke, not the 18-year-old who had watched her mother choose a richer man over her own child and then lie about it. I thought about Corinne's words about owning my story, and Declan laughing at me for underestimating my impact. My mother had been telling her version of the story for 3 years, the one where I was a selfish kid who walked away. Thanks to that, she had landed herself in a life surrounded by expensive things and a stepdaughter who treated fraud like a hobby. The irony was that I did not have to fabricate anything to make her look bad. All I had to do was finally tell the truth on the one platform I knew she could not control. The idea sat in my chest like a warm ember for days. I went back and forth, weighing the ethics of it. I did not want anyone harassing her. And I did not want to become the kind of person who used their platform to destroy lives just because they could. But this was not some petty grudge. This was about a pattern of lying, stealing, and rewriting reality at the expense of anyone who got in her way, including her own child. One evening while editing a new recipe video, I opened a fresh project and titled it, "My Mom Kicked Me Out at 18 with No Money and No Job." I stared at the words for a long time before closing my eyes and pressing save. I was not ready to record it yet, but for the first time, I knew exactly how I wanted this story to end, and it did not involve me staying silent while she pretended none of it had ever happened. I did not press record on that story video for weeks. The file just sat there on my laptop, the title staring back at me every time I opened my editing software. My mom kicked me out at 18 with no money and no job. It looked dramatic, even to me, and I had lived it. I kept telling myself I was too busy, that I should focus on recipes and brand deals. But deep down, I knew I was stalling, because once I put that story out there was no taking it back. One evening, after finishing a batch of recipe clips, I found myself alone in my tiny studio. The only light coming from the ring light I used for filming, the desert heat was still clinging to the walls. Even though the sun had been down for hours, I could hear my upstairs neighbor's television and the faint hum of traffic. It felt like the kind of evening when people make decisions they cannot undo. I set up my phone on the tripod, sat at my wobbly table, and for once there were no bags of rice or cans of beans in front of me. Just me, a glass of water, and the truth. I took a deep breath, pressed record, and started talking. I did not script it word for word, but I knew the beats. I told them my name, my age, the city I lived in. I described the sound of the garbage bag hitting the floor, my mother's voice telling me I was 18, broke, jobless, and therefore no longer her responsibility. I talked about sitting at that transit stop with $20 in my pocket and nowhere to go, about washing my face in a convenience store bathroom and pretending I still had a home. I told them about Corinne at the shelter, the early morning coffee shifts, the delivery runs that left my legs trembling. Then I told them about Crisis Kitchen and how the channel started, because I needed to prove to myself that I could make something useful out of almost nothing. I almost stopped there, but Corinne's words echoed in my mind. You can control the story you tell about yourself. So I told the rest. I told them how I had looked my mother up online and found her new existence, how she had replaced me with a richer man and a ready-made stepdaughter, and told people I had just decided to leave and not look back, how the money I had saved for college had quietly vanished right before my birthday, drawn out of my account and never spoken of again. I did not say her last name. I did not mention the city she lived in now or show any pictures. I blurred every screenshot I used and changed small details that were not important to the truth. I said the only thing that mattered was the pattern. Parents who choose to rewrite the story instead of owning what they have done. Before I finished, I leaned closer to the camera and made something very clear. I said, "Listen, if any of this sounds familiar to you, do not go digging or trying to guess who my mother is. Do not send hate to anyone you think might be involved. That is not what this is about. This is about people who have been told they are disposable realizing they are not. If you want to do something, tell your own story instead of attacking mine." When I played the recording back, my voice shook in places, but I sounded calmer than I felt. I edited the video down to about 12 minutes, added subtitles, and uploaded it with the title, "My Mom Kicked Me Out at 18 with No Money and No Job. Here is what happened next." My finger hovered over the post button for a long time. Then I pressed it, locked my phone, and forced myself to go wash dishes before I could watch the numbers. For a few hours, nothing seemed different. I answered some emails, prepped ingredients for the next recipe video, tried not to think about whether my mother would ever see this. Then, sometime after midnight, my phone buzzed so hard it almost slid off the counter. When I picked it up, my notifications were a blur. Comments poured in so fast I could not keep up. People telling me their own versions of that story. Parents apologizing on behalf of mothers like mine. Kids saying, "This happened to me too," with different details, but the same hollow ache. Most of them did exactly what I had asked. They focused on their own survival, their own healing. But the internet is full of people who love puzzles. It did not take long before a few comments started to ask careful questions. "Wait, did you grow up near this part of Las Vegas?" Someone else said, I think I know this hotel chain you are talking about. And then buried under hundreds of replies, a comment I could not ignore. It said, "If this is who I think it is, your mother has been telling everyone for years that you ran away and refused to talk to her. I used to work with her. We all thought you were some wild child who abandoned her. If this is you, I am sorry for believing that." I did not respond, but my hand shook as I scrolled. I never asked anyone to go to my mother's page. I never once mentioned her by name. But people talk, and Las Vegas is not as big as it looks. Former coworkers, neighbors, people who recognized her from photographs started connecting dots on their own, inside conversations I was not a part of. Then the stories about Tessa started surfacing for real. A woman commented that a teenager who looked a lot like my description had bought electronics using her card information when she trusted her to help with an online purchase. Someone else mentioned repeated chargebacks tied to the same last name at Sterling's auto business. They did not say her full name, but they said enough. I did not pin those comments. I did not like them. I did not need to. They took on a life of their own. A few days later, an email popped into my business inbox from a name that made my chest tighten. Sterling Whitmore. He introduced himself politely, said he had seen my video after someone sent it to him, and that parts of my story felt disturbingly familiar. Then he asked one question. Was your mother's first name Vivienne? I stared at that sentence for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have lied. Instead, I typed yes and pressed send, then closed my laptop before I could overthink it. I do not know exactly what happened in the Whitmore house after that. I was not there when Sterling confronted my mother, when he compared the timeline in my video to the one she had fed him. I was not there when he pulled bank statements, when he called the bank again about those strange credit card disputes tied to Tessa's shopping sprees. All I know is that about a week after I answered his email, my phone started buzzing in a different way. The first message came through while I was filming a new recipe. It was from a number I had deleted, but still recognized by heart. I am sorry. The next one, please answer. I need to explain. Then, they are saying horrible things about me, about us. Please help me fix this. Over the next few hours, the texts kept coming. She told me Sterling had thrown her out of his house after finding out the truth, that Tessa was under investigation for credit card fraud, and that the police had asked questions about what Vivienne knew and when she knew it. She said she might lose her job at the hotel because her name was being whispered around in connection with the investigation. She said she was scared, alone, and that I was the only one who could save her reputation by telling people it was all a misunderstanding. At one point she wrote, "I should not have kicked you out. I was stressed and stupid. Please, I am begging you. Just talk to me." For a moment, all the old instincts flared up. The part of me that had trained itself since childhood to fix things, to smooth over her messes, to be the reasonable one. I pictured her sitting in some half-empty apartment, phone in hand, staring at the door the way I had at 18. I could have picked up. I could have rewritten the ending, made it softer for her. Instead, I thought about that transit stop, the nights in the youth shelter, the comments under my video from people who had never gotten closure. I thought about how she had told an entire world I had walked away when she was the one who shut the door. I looked at her last message, "Please save me," and realized she still did not see me as a person, just as a tool, a public relations strategy, a shield. My phone kept buzzing in my hand. I opened our message thread one last time. Read it from the beginning. From the first, "I am sorry," to the last, "Please. I need you." Then I went to my settings, turned off notifications from her number, and set the phone face down on the table. The sound cut off mid-buzz. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, solid, like finally closing a door from my side for once. For the first time in my life, my mother needed something from me, and I chose to say nothing. And somehow that quiet felt louder than every scream I had swallowed the evening she kicked me out. In the weeks after I turned my phone face down on that table, the noise around my story slowly shifted from chaos to something quieter, heavier, more permanent. The video kept climbing, but the comment section settled into a mix of recipes people were trying and stories they felt brave enough to share because I had shared mine. I never made a follow-up exposing anyone, never dropped names or receipts beyond what I had already said. I did not have to. Las Vegas moved on the way cities do, but there are always ripples. I heard about some of them in fragments, mostly from people who had no idea I was the one at the center. A regular at the coffee shop mentioned that a manager at a hotel near the airport had been let go after her name started floating around in connection with a fraud investigation involving her boyfriend's kid. Someone from my community college who still had family in that suburb casually said, "Remember that fancy couple with the car shops I told you about?" Yeah. He broke off his engagement and kicked them out after finding out they lied about some pretty serious stuff. I pretended to be surprised, stirred my coffee, and kept my face neutral while my heart pounded. I did not celebrate. There was no evil laugh, no montage of me dancing on their metaphorical graves. It felt more like standing in the middle of an earthquake that had finally stopped and realizing the building you live in is still standing. From what I pieced together, Tessa did not end up in some dramatic prison cell, but the fraud investigation was real. She wound up with probation, a record that would follow her when she tried to apply for certain jobs, and mandatory classes about financial responsibility and online safety. Vivian did not go to jail either, but the fallout from lying and trying to cover things up was enough. Sterling broke up with her. The hotel did not want someone whose name came up in police reports welcoming guests at the front desk. Without his money or that job, she had to move into a much smaller apartment in a part of town that looked a lot more like the one we used to live in than the spotless suburb she had flaunted online. The friends who had believed her, my daughter ran away story, went very quiet. I saw all of this in glimpses, like looking into a house through cracks in the blinds. Sometimes people would send me links or screenshots, assuming I would be thrilled. The truth is, I mostly felt tired, not regretful, not exactly satisfied either. Just done. While their world tilted, mine kept moving forward. Crisis Kitchen kept growing. I finished my degree. Instead of just teaching people how to stretch $10 at the store, I started adding videos about building emergency savings, about knowing your rights if you get kicked out or cut off, about where to find local shelters and food banks without feeling like you have failed. I partnered with the shelter Corinne worked at to create a small grant fund. A chunk of my sponsorship money goes into buying grocery gift cards and basic kitchen starter kits for teens aging out of foster care or leaving unsafe homes. Sometimes we do live video classes where I teach them how to cook with whatever they can afford that week. Those are the days I wish I could go back to 18-year-old me at that transit stop and tell her, "One day you will feed people who are exactly where you are sitting right now." Corinne still checks in on me like some unofficial aunt. Declan loves reminding me that he called my videos valuable before any brand did. There are evenings I still think about my mother. Not the Instagram version with the polished smile, but the woman who chain-smoked outside our apartment when the rent was due and snapped at me because she had no one else to take it out on. I picture her in that smaller place, scrolling through her phone, seeing my face pop up on someone's For You page, and realizing that ignoring me did not erase me. I have not blocked her number. I just do not answer. It is not about punishing her anymore. It is about protecting the life I fought for. Maybe one day I will be ready to hear her voice again. Maybe not. Either way, the apology I needed most did not come from her. It came from myself. The moment I stopped believing I was the problem just because that was easier for her than facing what she did. People love to say that family is everything, but I do not think that is always true. Family is not just the people who share your last name or your blood. Sometimes it is the social worker who pushes a stack of housing forms toward you and says, "You deserve a safe place to sleep." Sometimes it is the friend who drags you back to your own potential when you are too numb to see it. Sometimes it is strangers on the internet who tell you that your story helped them cook dinner, or find the courage to leave a situation that is breaking them. My mother once told me that if I wanted to survive on my own, I should go do it. She meant it as punishment. In the end, it became my superpower. I survived without her. And then I learned how to help other people survive too. That, more than any scandal or job loss she faced, is the part that feels like real revenge. Living a life so rooted in truth and resilience that her version of me can never exist again. So, If any part of this sounds uncomfortably familiar, if you have ever been told you are ungrateful or dramatic for noticing the way someone is hurting you, I hope you hear this clearly. You are not crazy for wanting better. You are not selfish for setting boundaries even with the people who raised you. And if you feel safe sharing, tell your story. Not to destroy anyone, but to remind someone else huddled at their own metaphorical transit stop that they are not as alone or as disposable as they have been told.